Honestly, it would not be week 5 in SEC football if we didn't have the SEC football preview with Biscuits and SEC on this channel. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis alongside the Hammer and the Boss Man, and we are going to talk about college football matchups this weekend. Of course, if you are watching this, you can comment on YouTube, and if your comment is good enough, it'll make it on the screen and all that. So that is pretty cool as well. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, Steven. Good to see you again. A lot of fun matchups this week. Looking forward to talking about them.
Yeah, finally in like full-on conference play. It's great.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about MTSU. You don't have to worry about anything. It's just good football happening all over. I'm pretty excited about that. And we're going to start off with the first game. You got Florida and the bubble screens and these screen passes and not letting Graham Mertz throw the ball farther than 5 yards past the line of scrimmage, which, hey, we're all for. And you have Kentucky, whose offense has not really taken hold to this point. Devin Leary's a heck of a guy, all the ceiling in the world, but that offense hasn't gotten there. Kentucky is probably the favorite to win this game, but you can easily see how Florida would rise up and take this game. This is a weird game, I guess is my point. Hammer.
I don't know what to make of this one. Yeah, go ahead, Hank. Start it off.
No, yeah, I think we're all on the same page, right? So Florida looked terrible against Utah, played a couple nobodies, and they beat Tennessee. And so, they have a pretty good win under their belt. They've climbed back into the top 25 for whatever that's worth. In my opinion, not much of anything, but they're in there. But like you said, they're coming into this game a slight dog. Kentucky's undefeated. I don't know what to make of that at all. I don't think they've played anybody.
All we know is that they're a contender in the MAC at this point.
Right. And even in some of those games, they've looked kind of iffy. I would say early returns on the Devin Leary, Liam Cohen, revamped Kentucky offense have been so-so. I don't think they've quite found a rhythm yet. So it's going to be interesting to see if Florida gives them fits, because you mentioned in your little intro here, Florida's offense with Graham Mertz, I think, is what it is. If you allow them to run the ball and hit on those short passes, they're pretty good, but they're not really explosive. So I think Kentucky's going to be able to limit them. It's just, to me, what does Kentucky's offense have? Because I honestly don't know.
Yeah, it's just the weirdest thing. Boss man, what would you do with Graham Mertz? You think Florida should just lean on the running game and just kind of keep doing what they're doing? I mean, it's working at the moment.
I mean, yeah, just keep doing what you're doing as long as it's working. I mean, it seems like, in the first game, they looked completely discombobulated against Utah. Utah had them on the ropes. Graham Mertz, people were already on Twitter, oh gosh, Graham Mertz, why did Billy Napier get him out of the portal when there were so many of these other guys to get? But it seems like they've settled down. In the last couple of games, they found a couple things that worked. The Charlotte game last week left a lot to be desired as well, though. I mean, I didn't watch that game, but I kept hearing things, you ought to check out what's going on with Florida. Like, it doesn't look great. And, watch some of the highlights from that game. And, yeah, it wasn't real impressive. But they got a win against Charlotte. They got a good win against Tennessee. They put points on the board against Tennessee as well. And then we're able to hold Tennessee's, prolific offense, which we don't know how prolific it is going to be this year. We've seen it through 4 games and doesn't look as good as it did last year. Yeah, I mean, if you're Florida, keep doing what's working. And if that just kind of starts to, they got to change things up. I think they should take a couple more shots. You got Ricky Pearsall, and that kid, I mean, some of the catches that he is making, he's a weapon. They don't have a ton of other weapons, but I mean, why not take a couple shots? I think, if they do end up struggling a little bit in the first half on offense. Really, though, in this one, I was looking at it. I think it's a total toss-up. I have no idea what to make of Kentucky right now. Devin Leary, I'm a little worried about the turnovers specifically. They haven't really played anyone yet, as we've talked about, and we've thrown 5 interceptions already here this year, and it doesn't look like it's clicking on all cylinders with that Liam Cohen offense, like Hank said. So I look at this Florida defense, and I think this Florida defense is going to be able to create problems for this Kentucky offense. This Florida defense is pretty stout.
Yeah,
so yeah, they're pretty good. It doesn't, I'm not ready to say they're the Florida defenses of old, like we were used to seeing, 8-10 years ago. But they're pretty darn good. Yeah. So I'm taking Florida by 4, 24-20.
All right, and John DeLon just hopped into the chat for a second and said hi, y'all. He's an
Hey, John.
LSU guy. Yeah, he watches some of our live streams, so he's popping in for the next game on the schedule, apparently,
Right.
which is LSU at Ole Miss. And this is, in my opinion, the ultimate coin flip game. You have a situation where there's both teams have questions, especially LSU's defensively. Ole Miss's offense didn't look particularly great against Alabama in that game. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's a situation where kind of Nick Saban is just in Lane Kiffin's head. I mean, it's just a weird situation, but I do know this. After Ole Miss has a clunker of a game offensively, that rarely happens 2 weeks in a row. They had that game against LSU last year. We all saw what they did against Texas A&M the next week. I think that Ole Miss is going to come home, go against that LSU defense. They're going to establish Quinshon Judkins in this game, who is healthy for the first time this year, apparently. And then you have all those weapons that have come back. That is, I think, going to be the path for Ole Miss in this game. And they're going to earn the right to pick on that secondary by trying to block and run the ball against that front seven, if that makes sense, boss man.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Looking at this game, I was thinking last week, we talked about it last week. They have all these weapons coming back. You got Prescorn coming back. Trey Harris is probably going to be back. Zachary Franklin's going to be back, So I was thinking last week might be the week that Ole Miss was going to utilize those weapons and really see them come into their own. But this Alabama defense is really stout. For all the problems that they've got on offense, the Alabama defense is solid. Ole Miss was able to get a few, chunk plays. Jackson Dart looked good a couple times, but once they got, in Alabama territory a lot, it seemed like things kind of stalled. This week is the week, though, that it can come together. If you look at that LSU defense, they're giving up yards, they're giving up points. Same thing on the other side, though. So I'm thinking this is going to be a track meet. I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I think Jaden Daniels is going to be able to throw the ball on Ole Miss. And then on the other side, I think that Jackson Dart's going to be able to hit some big plays. I think Quinshon Judkins, having him back, is going to be huge. If they can establish the running game, I think that they're going to be able to utilize those weapons on the outside with Trey Harris, Prescorn, on some seam routes and coming down the middle. So I think this one is going to be a super close game, a really fun one to watch, a lot of points scored. So keep your remote close by, unless you're on that YouTube multi-view, because I think you're going to change the channel and change it back, and somebody's going to score. So I think it's going to be a fun one. And overall, though, I'm thinking LSU pulls this one out slightly. I think it's going to be tough since it's at Ole Miss at night. But I've got LSU by 3. I think I picked them 41-38.
Okay, that's pretty close to John. John's picking 45-35.
Here we go.
What have you got, Hammer?
Steven, this might be a terrible move, but I'm doubling down on Lane Kiffin. So I picked Ole Miss to win last week against Alabama. Did not go well, obviously. And frankly, when I first, coming into the week, right, it's okay, Ole Miss, LSU this week. I'm thinking LSU is going to win this one. But the more I thought about it, I just got to thinking, all right, they're back at home. Ole Miss, it certainly wasn't a blowout. So embarrassed is maybe the wrong word, but I think Kiffin was probably embarrassed, at least, just kind of like you said, the trash that he was talking coming into it, as he's known to do. And he got shut up again. And this is basically his next opportunity, right, to prove a point, and it's at home. That's where I think the big thing comes into play here. I think they'll be able to frustrate LSU enough offensively. And like Alex said, I think both teams are going to score a lot here. I just look at this matchup and think that Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. are going to scheme up a couple plays on an inexperienced LSU secondary. There's going to be shots downfield, and if Dart can hit them, I feel good that they'll win this game. And I think, again, being back home, coming off of a tough loss, wounded animal mode, I think Ole Miss is going to pull this one out like, I don't know, 31-30, 35-34. Like I'm expecting a 1, 2, 3-point ball game because I think teams are they're evenly matched. And if LSU plays to their ceiling, yeah, they probably win. But they haven't quite been consistent this year. So I'm picking Ole Miss at home. but this could go either way.
And I'll give my pick on this one too, just because in the background, everybody can tell who I am, and you can probably imagine who I'm going to pick. But this is a game that I think LSU's offense is good. Ole Miss's offense is good. I think LSU's has a slightly better offense than Ole Miss does. Ole Miss has a much better defense than LSU does. So if it's in a shootout, you kind of like the Ole Miss defense to be the defense that is able to get the stop, the big play. And I think Suntarine Perkins is going to play a big role in this game, and we'll see exactly what happens. I have it at 41-31, Ole Miss winning the game. So
I like it.
Yeah, would be big.
Our third game of the week that we want to talk about is the South Carolina Gamecocks going to the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, this is the return. Well, I guess South Carolina played in Tennessee for the first time since basically South Carolina embarrassed them a year ago. I mean, completely shut them down. I mean, those uniforms for Tennessee, I like the orange helmets. It was a good look, but they're never going to wear them again because they just got absolutely curb stomped that night. And Spencer Rattler, that was the first game that he was like a competent quarterback. Now he's playing pretty well. I think Tennessee being favored by 12 points or so, that's kind of fool's gold going into this game. I'm not really ready to take South Carolina outright, but I think South Carolina might cover this game, boss man.
I agree with you. I was looking at this game, and I mean, to me, Tennessee's offense just hasn't shown – they haven't shown it yet to the point where I think that they're going to cover a spread like that. And Spencer Rattler right now is the guy that Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks thought that they got when they got him in from the transfer portal. They thought they were going to get that all of last year, and it didn't really pan out. He and the OC didn't really mesh last year until the Tennessee game, and then it all just kind of came to fruition where they just let it all loose. But this year with Dowell Loggins, he's looked a lot better, even under pressure constantly. The offensive line has not played well. They did a little bit better job against Georgia, which was surprising and impressive, but they can't run the ball. So really it comes down to Spencer Rattler and what can he do? And to me, I go back to it. That offensive line for South Carolina is what worries me the most in this game. I think that Tennessee's got a good defensive front seven. They got Tyler Barron, who's I don't think he's leading the SEC in sacks, but he's second in the SEC in sacks. They've got a good defensive line. So I'm looking for Tennessee to utilize that to get pressure on Spencer Rattler all night. I don't think South Carolina, they haven't been able to run the ball on anyone all year. I don't think that this is the game that they're going to be able to run it. I'm looking for Joe Milton to use some of those weapons on the outside finally. I think he's going to be able to hit a few shots against this South Carolina defense, even though the South Carolina secondary can be good at times. But in the end, I think that Tennessee just has too much. I think Tennessee's better. I think they've got the revenge factor on their side. It's a night game in Neyland. So at the end of the day, I'm taking Tennessee 31, South Carolina 23. So I think South Carolina covers that spread, but I'm taking Tennessee.
Yeah, Hammer, that offensive line is terrible. If anybody remembers those old Flex Seal commercials and everything, when he's out there in the boat that was like a screen door that he turned in, that he could float. Well, South Carolina's offensive line is kind of like a before picture of that. And so if you tried to go out there, go straight to the bottom, there's holes all in it. I mean, they're not good, but what they do for Shane Beamer is they play extremely hard, Hammer.
They do. And I think that was a big reason they won last year, right? Tennessee was one-loss team flying high, thinking they're going to come in and basically sleepwalk to a win. South Carolina obviously had other ideas. So I'm going contrarian again here. I like Tennessee to win, but also cover. I think I had it 38-24, something like that. I just look at it as basically, to me, if Tennessee cannot move the ball on South Carolina after what we've seen South Carolina's defense to be, especially last week when Mississippi State, who didn't even have an offense until last weekend, threw the ball all over them, I think it sets up well for Tennessee. I expect Joe Milton to hit some shots downfield and them to be able to get their receivers in space. Certainly Rattler's ability and the way he's playing worries me, especially in terms of covering a spread. It could be a backdoor cover situation very easily with Rattler just making a couple big time throws late in the fourth. Speaking of which, Xavier Legette, we got to mention that guy. He is a beast for the Gamecocks. Really, really fun to watch. So I do think Tennessee will pull this one out at home with the revenge factor. I think they will cover, but I will say if they don't, then I think we can kind of chalk up the Tennessee offense to just being average to below average, right? If they can't move the ball at home against South Carolina, then they just sort of are what they are, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of like my favorite joke that is currently around college football. If you need a person to throw the ball 40 yards, Joe Milton's your guy. If you need him to throw it 13 yards, he can still throw it 40 yards. If you need him to throw it 70 yards, he can still throw it 40 yards. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. It's, the whole Donald Driver broken finger thing and everything. I mean, it's like Joe Milton is a jugs machine that's constantly set to 120 miles an hour, and it just doesn't matter where he's throwing the ball.
And that was the big thing that we were thinking about going into this year, that he needed to kind of control, to work on his accuracy. He's got all the talent. He's got all of the, measurables, all of that. He's got a cannon for an arm, but can he rein that in and be accurate with the football? And so far this year, that hasn't necessarily been the case. One more thing to mention as far as South Carolina goes, Juice Wells, not going to be playing again in this game. And I think that's a big thing. I think South Carolina, if they were going to win this game, going to Tennessee, going to Neyland Stadium at night, they were going to need all the help they could get, and they would need Juice Wells. And so without him playing, I don't think they've got the horses to do it.
Okay, another thing, we're going to talk about Connor Wegman because they're going to get into storylines at the moment. But there's another one thing that popped on Twitter a little bit. It wasn't that much of a thing, but it was talking about how Clemson could leave the ACC as early as this year. And their intended goal to join is their preferred place is the Southeastern Conference, but they would listen to the Big Ten. South Carolina, they said South Carolina is not in favor of this. And this is my opinion. Now, obviously, I come from a state with Mississippi State. Having another team in the SEC is not that big of a deal to Ole Miss people. I'm sure it's the same thing in Tennessee, and it's the same thing in Alabama. If you could ask Texas A&M, who has been in the league briefly and came into the SEC knowing that they were the only school in Texas and they would get to have that banner, and then you would bring Texas into the league, which is kind of their natural predator, so to speak, shouldn't South Carolina just shut up?
Yes. As you said, from an A&M fan perspective, right? We were mad when Texas got in, but it makes perfect sense, and so does Clemson. I mean, if Clemson is intending
and Florida
to leave
State, we're not leaving Florida out of this either.
Yeah,
right. Florida State and Clemson, assuming they want out of the ACC, which the reports and Florida State's made it clear. They both made it clear. It's a no-brainer to me. I mean, personally, I would prefer they don't. I prefer they stay in the ACC and everything just kind of stays as is. But we have to accept reality here and know that that's likely not going to be the case, and probably similar to the OU Texas situation, right? If you have a big school, a big brand like this that says we're unhappy with our conference, we're going to move. Well, someone's jumping up and taking them, and if you're the Southeastern Conference and you don't, then you're losing out. And it's unfortunate that that's where we are. But again, if those brands want out and Sankey and the SEC don't welcome them in because of state rivalries, that's foolish. And it's frankly, I mean, it's a short-term outlook, because the way things are going, you're going to need those brands to keep up. So yes, South Carolina, Florida, really any state school. I guess Georgia maybe eventually could come to that, although I don't think Georgia Tech will ever get their act together. Maybe Georgia Southern will rise up, but
Georgia,
that stuff doesn't matter.
Left. It's one of those they had their chance situations. I don't know if Georgia Tech will ever be anything but the X. Them and Tulane. Good job, guys. You really good forethought there.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you want to think about the teams that, if I was the Southeastern Conference, that I would bring into the Southeastern Conference, these are the four teams, and they're probably not the four teams that you're thinking of, but I do like Clemson and Florida State. I think they add brand, they add eyeballs. I would bring in also North Carolina. If North Carolina works, it fits. That's a contiguous state. Their rivalry with South Carolina and Clemson, that would absolutely work. And I would bring in Oklahoma State.
I like that.
Yeah, for the same reason that Texas got brought into Texas A&M. Oklahoma State and Bedlam and all that, that would be a natural fit in this conference and not screw up the footprint, because the Big Ten right now, Russia is closer to Seattle, Washington than Rutgers.
Yeah,
I mean, they're obvious. They will go all over the country. I would not be surprised to see Miami in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
At least the SEC has some sort of regionality to it. And I would do the Oklahoma State thing. Now they'd have to quit crying, and they'd almost have to come a little bit Oklahoma State hat in hand and realize what's going on here. But if they did that, yeah, I would take them. I think the rivalry is renewed with A&M and Texas and Oklahoma, and having Arkansas playing both the Oklahoma schools, that'd be fantastic. Missouri, there's a lot of fit that would happen with that maybe you wouldn't get with Virginia, because everybody talks about Virginia and Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I agree with you, Stephen. I could talk about this topic for an hour, 2 hours if you wanted to. There's so much to discuss on it. The first thing to talk about is like these backroom deals, the handshake deals when it comes to conference realignment, they don't matter at all. And some of these ones, that have been for longstanding, like Florida, we're not allowing Florida State in, or South Carolina, no Clemson. It's a new ball game now. It doesn't matter. USC, when they went to the Big Ten, they had a handshake deal, supposedly, that said that Oregon should never come to this conference. Well, that fell apart after about 4 months when the Pac-12 started falling apart. A&M had a backroom deal, handshake deal with Slive and then with Sankey to say Texas will never come to the conference. Texas is now in the SEC. So I think that these schools who have for so long, said no to Florida State, no to Clemson, no to some of these others, you kind of have to take a step back and say what is best for the conference at the end of the day. And to me, adding Clemson and Florida State, if the ACC is going to implode, it's a no-brainer, especially because when you look at you're kind of thinking of, okay, if the ACC implodes, we're the SEC. We're supposed to be the big bad guy here, and we want to have the pick of the litter. Well, the pick of the litter is Clemson and Florida State, first of all. And everybody's it doesn't add more eyeballs in a different market or whatever. Clemson is a massive brand. Florida State is a massive football brand. They're going to add eyeballs. I'm not sure, if anybody's been paying attention to the ratings, you can take Colorado out of the ratings. They've been doing crazy ratings, on TV. But if you even take them out, college football ratings are through the roof this year, and it's only going to get better. And so if you add those two massive properties, I think it's a no-brainer. I don't know why the SEC, it seems like, is kind of thumbing their nose at it a little bit. I don't think that I think they should absolutely add those two if that's what ends up happening. Another one to watch out for, I think, on your Oklahoma State train of thought, I would love to see the Bedlam rivalry stay. I love all the rivalries of college football. I'm a college football traditionalist. I love all of that. But another school to think about might be Texas Tech, because if Oklahoma State were to come, Texas Tech may not totally fit I would say the brand necessarily of the SEC, just as far as their culture goes. But I do think that they would add value to the SEC, and they've got those rivalries from the old Big 8 and Big 12 days. They wouldn't be my first choice. Oklahoma State probably would. UNC, maybe NC State, Virginia,
Kansas. I would add Kansas to that.
Kansas, of course, especially because of basketball, and they're looking better in football. Which Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy right now, I don't know what's going on there. That's a little worrisome if I'm any conference.
He's going into the last bedlam with Oklahoma scoring 60 points a game and him in the middle of like a 4-quarterback quandary has anybody followed? Spencer Sanders goes to Ole Miss as a backup quarterback. Do you think Mike Gundy is regretting that decision about right now?
Without a doubt. Yeah. And especially with I was talking about this. Hank and I were actually talking about this a couple days ago, because I hadn't been paying too much attention to Oklahoma State. I just figure, okay, they're going to be 7-1 or whatever going into some, they're just typically good like that. But you've got a couple poster children for guys who don't like to use the portal and who have not adapted. Mike Gundy is right behind Dabo Swinney. He might be 1A behind Dabo Swinney in terms of people who are, coaches who are refusing to use the portal or not using it well. And Mike Gundy's right there. He's just not using the portal well. That Spencer Sanders thing, if you want to go, be gone. Man, that is coming back to bite him right now. And he might get fired by the end of this year, which is crazy to say.
Yeah, at least they should force him to get a haircut, right?
Yes, that's for sure. That should have been part of his contract, the re-up.
Him and Quinn Ewers cut the mullets, and now they mean business.
So, honestly, I'm looking forward. Like next year, Ole Miss does not get Alabama, and they do not get Auburn. For the first time in 30 years, Ole Miss does not get either of those teams. Maybe longer than that. But they get Oklahoma. Oklahoma comes to the Grove for the first time. I think Ole Miss and Oklahoma have played one time, and Ole Miss beat them in the last game of the 20th century. So I think they did that intentionally. Kind of Texas has had their Grove experience in 2012. Whenever you had the new game, this introductory thing, I think it was always going to be Oklahoma. Going to Ole Miss is kind of like here you go. This is a gift to your fan base.
Yeah, I think so. That'll be a fun game.
Yeah, the SEC schedule next year is going to be really fun with those two new teams in there. And like you said, just the sort of traditional games you're used to with the divisions aren't all there. So it's going to be really fun when those two teams are finally on the schedule. I mean, we can quit talking about how they would be in the SEC this year or whatever. We can actually see it on the field.
Before we close with Connor Wegman thoughts, I will say this. I think this is the last year that Ole Miss and Mississippi State is on Thanksgiving night, because I think next year ESPN is going to absolutely blow it out, and we're going to see the return of the Lone Star Showdown or whatever you call in that situation.
I think you're probably right. Yeah, I think that's coming back, and I think it will be on Thanksgiving. I think I forget who. I don't know if A&M has LSU next year or not. I think we might, but I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, I agree. That's coming back. It'll be on Thanksgiving, especially for the fact that it's going to be at Kyle Field. I have no doubt that ESPN is going to want to have that game at night.
Oh my goodness, the atmosphere for that game. Oh my goodness. I know I will be locked in. You could have the Chiefs playing the Dolphins on that Thursday night, Thanksgiving night. I am not watching that NFL game. I am watching the Texas A&M game, because after 10 years, I can't imagine what that place is going to look like.
It's going to be cool.
With the knife. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be cool.
I'll be honest with you. I don't think I'm going to eat for a couple days before the game. I'm going to be just so, nervous about the whole thing and just wanting to, thinking about it. So I may not have Thanksgiving dinner until like the next day, because I'm going to be so worried about what's going to happen during the game.
It'll be weird for me, because that'll be back to the Egg Bowl being on Saturday, which, other than the 2000s, it was most of the time it was on Thanksgiving. But before then, it was always on Saturday. It was always a Saturday game. And it's going to be weird to see that get back. Now, if they just can get the LSU back to Halloween weekend, we could be in good shape. But let's come back to 2023 before we get out of here. Connor Wegman out for the season. They said that apparently I read this and I had to read it again, because apparently whatever he hurt was a load-bearing part of his ankle, which I assumed that everything in your ankle was load-bearing. But, I mean, they talked about that. He's out. Ole Miss has not played a quarterback that won the starting job out of fall since 2019 in Kellen Mond. So Lane Kiffin has never played a Texas A&M starting quarterback since he's been the coach at Ole Miss. Max Johnson takes the reins. Thoughts, boss man?
Really sad for Connor Wegman. Hope he gets better soon. I've heard kind of conflicting reports. It's definitely, lower leg. I've heard ankle. I've heard foot. It's definitely load bearing. And so he can hardly walk on it. He's going to be in a boot and having to do some rehab, minimum 3.5 months that he's going to be out. So feel really bad for him, especially for the fact that he was looking really good, except for one half of football against Auburn. I have no doubt that if he had been the quarterback and hadn't gotten hurt, that in the second half he would have come out and done very well. So unfortunate to see him go down. However, looking at the way Max Johnson played in the second half against Auburn, I feel like Aggie fans can take a bit of a deep breath. Max Johnson may not have the intangibles, that Connor Weigman has. However, he's still a solid player. The kid was highly recruited for a reason. The kid went to LSU, started a full season at LSU for a reason. Hank did a great job in our previews this week of talking about Max Johnson, his stats, and kind of taking a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So I think A&M's ceiling is still very high with Max Johnson, especially with the fact that all those wide receivers they've got, their wide receiver room is extremely deep. They've got 3 deep in the running back room. The biggest thing for Aggies is that offensive line has got to get better, and it has to protect Max Johnson, because if Max Johnson goes down, it wouldn't be the first time that A&M has seen multiple quarterbacks go down in a season. Last year, we saw 2 get injured, and it was because the offensive line had difficulty blocking. So if Max Johnson goes down, God forbid, A&M does not have much behind him. So with Max Johnson, the ceiling is still high. As long as he stays healthy, I think Aggies should still be confident that they can have a good season.
So Hammer, before we get out of here, Auburn returned a fumble for a touchdown. Jimbo was out at about the hash mark. For $10 million a year, you got to make that play. That's a loaf, right?
It kind of was a loaf, man. I mean, he clearly he was just caught out of position. I think he missed his gap or something, because when the play was really in his face, man, he totally froze up and just kind of, I mean, he just turtled, basically, just stood there like, oh, crap, I'm not supposed to be out here. Yeah, that was a pretty hilarious moment. I mean, thankfully, it would have been very funny if he had stuck his leg out or done something, but obviously that would have not ended well. So it would have been funny for about 30 seconds, and then I don't know what would have happened, but it would have been bad. Yeah, I mean, Jimbo, go ahead.
He should be thankful that the Auburn player took it easy on him, because that player had a free shot. He could have done it. He could have completely laid him out, and he didn't do it.
And nobody would have said a word.
No, not a thing. Jimbo would have still gotten flagged.
Yeah, exactly. Like he had a chance to just lower his shoulder right into Jimbo, and thankfully he held up. But man, the still frame of that is just, it's classic.
Oh, it's fantastic. I just see that and I laugh every time. By the way, Auburn's not good.
No.
Auburn and Mississippi State, 3-2 potential. It's there.
Yeah, I think after this weekend, I'm calling it now. I think Holden Garner is going to be the starting quarterback going forward. I don't think that Peyton Thorne or Robbie Ashford are going to be the guy, especially as you're going into play. I think it's out. Who is it this week? It's I forget who Auburn has.
It's Georgia this week.
Georgia. Yeah, that's right. It's Georgia. Yeah, like
Georgia.
It's going to be even worse than what A&M made them look like. And the Auburn fan base, Peyton Thorne in the offseason was saying how nice people at Auburn were, how nice people in the South were. And I knew it. When he said that, it's like, just wait until you have the bad game. It isn't going to be very fun. And he's learning that now. They're already calling for it. Holden Garner, put him in.
All the coaches are saying, it's like, on social media, the mental health and all the players and everything is like, you've been begging these people for money. You need to expect that they're going to open their mouth.
Yeah, it means more. It just means more, man.
Yeah. Don't stop by that Auburn Buc-ee's anytime soon, Peyton Thorne.
Which, by the way, that is the weirdest flex in history.
Yeah, only school in the SEC with a Buc-ee's in town or whatever. I mean, all right.
Yeah. That would be like Ole Miss if they had a rest area. There's like, hey, we have a rest area. We're the only college campus with a rest. That's what Buc-ee's is. I mean, it's like, hey, you need to fill up and some beaver nuggets, go in there.
Right. Clean bathrooms.
Yeah, it's like, come on. And besides, I'll say it right now. I prefer Wawa. It's not 700,000 square feet wide, and it has everything you need, and the bathrooms are just as clean.
Buc-ee's is like a Walmart / barbecue food counter. It's a spectacle.
I think that's what it is. And they say everything's bigger in Texas. I think that is they've exported that to the rest of the state. Everything is bigger than Texas. That's what that is.
Yep.
Right.
And I think we're about to get one down here, which, you know, I live in a geographic anomaly because the further south you go, the further north you get. And Buc-ee's hasn't quite made it to where I am. You can go up in northern Florida and get all of that stuff, but that's where I am.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of Wawas and all kinds of stores that you're used to seeing in the Northeast are down here.
Right. Yeah, you got a bunch of transplants. Nobody's moving from the north to the Florida Panhandle. They're going down where you're at or further south.
You know, the funny thing is, like around Tallahassee and everything, they had the first hurricane in like 100 years to hit that area. And it's like the hurricanes don't even go there.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely nuts. Anyway, thank you guys for joining the show. We'll do this again next week. I mean, we're already in week 5. We're like over a third of the way through the season. It's just flying. And before long, we're going to be pissed off that college football is over with. So
100%.
Always hurts.
Yeah.
Off season always hurts. So glad to be in the middle of it.
All right. You guys take care, and we'll see y'all next week.
Thanks, Stephen.
All right.
Thanks, Stephen.